everybody. Welcome into Hail Yes, a Detroit Free Press podcast about University of Michigan athletics. I'm Tony Garcia, Michigan beat writer for The Free. I'm joined by my colleague, my buddy, Reiner Sabin. He's our Big Ten insider, and we record this as I'm sitting on the third floor of our Courtyard Marriott here in La Vista, Nebraska, somewhere along I-80 with Omaha and Lincoln. Reiner, a few floors above me, somewhere up there, I believe on the sixth floor. I'm sure there's a metaphor in there somewhere. Reiner, how's it going up there?
It's going well. I mean, I'm living the life up here in the Courtyard La Vista.
You got another good breakfast sandwich today, I hope?
Breakfast bowl.
Breakfast. Yeah, that is what it is.
Yeah, potatoes and eggs, and it was actually pretty good. No complaints there.
Good. You know who else is not complaining today? Anybody affiliated with the Michigan football program after a 45-7 beatdown. And beatdown might not even be a strong enough phrase of Nebraska yesterday in Lincoln. That is why we are out here in the beautiful Corn State. It's not just because we like the Great Plains. And so lots to get into about yesterday. Really Michigan's most thorough showing. So in the A block, we want to talk about it. Michigan's complete game as one of our three thoughts. Their run game, clearly fine. Nebraska had the number one statistical run defense. Michigan made short work of that. And then you had a nice piece on Michigan's expectation of that we will win now, as opposed to we can win now. Trevor Keegan's comments, Braden McGregor, and another dominant road game to sort of start their march is sort of where we'll go with that. Then after the break, we scan it out, big picture, 5 weeks in. I mean, people were asking yesterday, Michigan players postgame, what would you think about being number one, right, Reiner, after Georgia struggled with Auburn? So it is that time of year. There you are starting to build a body of work, and you're looking a little more than just outside your walls. At least we are. Michigan might not be, but we are.
Yeah, I mean, again, Michigan took care of business. They look like the elite team that many expected them to be heading into the season. Everything seemed to come together against the Cornhuskers on Saturday, right from the get-go, and continued onward through the end of the game.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that in 1 minute after I ask you about the atmosphere. Just because I think that was part of that game story, right? Of this steamrolling, we were built up. I mean, I had never been to Nebraska before. I believe this is your first trip as well, and I mean, a lot of the players were talking about how Nebraska has been their favorite atmosphere, the night game from 2021 that they've seen. And I think I can only chalk it up to Michigan taking the wind out of their sails that quickly, because, I mean, nobody was going at all from what we could see.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it was, I thought the atmosphere was kind of bland overall, even pregame, before Michigan kind of asserted its dominance. It just seemed like nobody was that enthused about the game. You just didn't feel the pulse outside the stadium at all. It's almost as if Nebraska fans were expecting this kind of result, knowing the quality of the team in Matt Rule's first season. I guess they've come to expect to be disappointed at by now. The days of the 90s Huskers and even decades before under Tom Osborne, those days are long gone, and this program looks like they're just kind of a middle of the pack Big Ten team, and have been since they entered the conference. And so it's just more of the same from Nebraska's standpoint, and maybe that's affecting the atmosphere, but it wasn't that impressive to me.
Right, and I guess Trevor Keegan did say on the first snap, Michigan had to go silent count because it was a little loud. But then from there, it was, I mean, that is what most road teams do in most road environments. So that's not unique, certainly when the noise gets up. But I mean, as we keep saying, the reason it never got too loud is Michigan snuffed it out from the beginning. 45-7. It started with an opening 11-play, 75-yard drive. Roman Wilson Cornelius Johnson had a circus catch a few weeks ago, sort of bobbling, juggling against Bowling Green. That one was a little more, hey, look what I found. Roman Wilson will be on You Got Mossed on Monday. I mean, just going up and over, I think it was Gifford, one of Nebraska's actual better defensive backs for the opening touchdown. Then 2 plays in on defense, Braden McGregor bats a ball. Big KG, Kenneth Grant, comes down with it. I think I heard that they sang for "He's a Jolly Good Fellow" to him in the locker room afterwards. I'm not sure why. But they love when the big guys get involved. That's the second big man pick in a few weeks. And it was just an onslaught from there.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a complete domination. Again, Michigan was playing well in all 3 phases, particularly on offense and defense. I think they really controlled things from the get-go, especially with their run game. I mean, that was the question. Was Nebraska's, top 5 run defense going to be able to stop, Michigan's ground attack? And there were some, concerns about Michigan and whether the run game would travel, because they looked shaky at times during the lead up to this game. I mean, with the offensive line, and although some of those questions obviously were resolved in the Rutgers performance, but that opening drive really kind of set the tone. I mean, they just really ran right at them, were able to create push at the line of scrimmage. Then obviously J.J. McCarthy throws the crazy 29-yard pass with the amazing catch by Roman Wilson. I mean, even in that pass, even before the pass blocking, Nebraska had no chance at getting to McCarthy all game. And, the athleticism of Michigan was so much greater than Nebraska too. And that was evident on the first drive. And then obviously you got the pick off the tip the tip pass by Braden McGregor. Kenneth Grant comes down with it. Then 3 plays later, Kalel Millions runs for 20 yards and scores, and it's 14-0. 7:15 left in the first quarter, and nobody was expecting Nebraska to come back at that point. Basically the tone of the game had been set, and Michigan was going to go on to win that game.
Yeah, there was any doubt that what little hope there was before the game, it felt like lasted for not even a minute, which is perhaps why the atmosphere may have let us down, certainly didn't let the Michigan players down. And you were talking about the level of athlete, and that certainly stood out to me as well, because it wasn't just J.J. McCarthy going off and Blake Corum going off, right? Yes, Roman Wilson had a couple touchdowns, but and J.J. and Blake had very nice games. But it was not just Michigan's superstars, right? It was Ladarius Henderson having a very nice day, sliding in at left tackle when Miles Hinton he was listed as questionable on the pregame report. We saw him warming up. I don't know if he couldn't go or just what the decision was, but there, Josiah Stewart on defense, really his first 2 sacks as a Michigan player. Keon Sabb, who started for Rodmore, who did come in, but Sabb rotated in the game. He had another 5 tackles, just on and on down. And then you mentioned Kalel Mullings, who to me was in some ways the story of the game, which we'll get to in just a minute about the run game. But when I just wrap up the big picture complete game, Reiner, there were no penalties. There were no turnovers, not a single penalty committed. It's just as clean as can be.
Yeah, it was well executed from start to finish. The players were on point. The execution was pristine. Michigan looked like, for the first time, really the number 2 team in the country. They look like a college football playoff team. These kind of teams, the standard is so high, and they have to execute at a high level from a week in, week out basis, regardless of the opponent they're facing. Michigan, for the first time this season, really didn't play down to the competition. They just played their game, and Nebraska was just left in the dust. And I thought that was the most impressive thing about this game was just how well they execute from start to finish. And you alluded to no penalties is a perfect indication of that. I mean, they could have let the foot off the gas pedal. Even when the backups came in, they could have maybe slacked a little bit. And even the second unit was able to execute pretty well, given their limitations too. I mean, but again, the actual play-to-play performance was pretty impressive across the board.
Yeah, I mean, Jim Harbaugh said it post-game. He said no one was loafing, I believe was the word he said. And I can't believe we haven't mentioned it almost 10 minutes in. If it was not for a busted 74-yard run with 4 minutes and 17 seconds left in the game, Michigan had Nebraska 45-0, which would have been the first shutout since 1996. Arizona State shut Nebraska out in 1996. So 343 games, the fifth longest active streak, the seventh longest streak for any team in the history of college football. So, I mean, what Michigan's defense was inches, like one busted play from their secondary or their second string away from doing, something very, very historic. So that is the level of domination that we were talking about. And then on the other side, yes, it was a big run from Nebraska that took away from that. Michigan did not have any big run. However, they will take this rushing effort 8 days out of the week, 51 carries, 249 yards, 3 scores on the ground. McCarthy gets in, Mullings gets in, Corum gets in, and Nebraska had given up 186 total rushing yards through 4 weeks. Michigan passed that midway through the third quarter, right, by themselves.
Yeah, I mean the questions about whether the running game was going to be as strong this year may be resolved. I mean, again, I don't know what the quality of really Nebraska's run defense is based on the opponents that they played prior to Michigan. However, Michigan in the last 2 games has kind of recreated that identity that they've had the last 2 years, where they've been able to kind of impose their will on opponents with their running game and then play off of it with McCarthy. I mean, he only threw 16 passes. They didn't need to throw the ball very much, but when they did, they were extremely effective. And part of that was because of the running game. And I mean, again, this offensive line also looks very solid in pass protection. Again, like JJ McCarthy was never really affected by any pressure by Nebraska. And so, and that's kind of been the story of the first few weeks. I mean, some wondered if this offensive line was built better for passing. I mean, and was more equipped for pass protection than straight up run blocking. But they may be able to do both pretty well. Maybe they're more versatile than the offensive lines of the past 2 years. I mean, and more balanced in the ability to both pass protect and run block. And so, again, the questions about the running game have been resolved in the last 2 weeks. I think that Michigan's kind of rediscovered that identity and that physicality that they need to kind of grind opponents into the dust.
Yeah. And Michigan's done it. I mean, without a 100-yard game from Blake Corum, right? Yesterday, 16 carries, 71 yards, and a touchdown. If you had that, you would not think that, Michigan's ground game got going. But he didn't. I mean, Corum scored midway through the third, and they didn't have to put another carry on his body. And so it was it's really exactly what you wanted if you were Michigan. And here is what really struck me about the week before. It was JJ McCarthy running 7 times, 51 yards, and just getting out on the edges and having to keep the defense honest, which opened one element. And the other element for me is that Kalel Mullings is an actual battering ram. I mean, I think he's the new person on Michigan I would least like to tackle. And that goes with Kenneth Grant, because like, yes, he's 100 pounds bigger, but I think he's so big, you just dive at his ankles, right? Like there's a little strategy there and he might not be able to hurdle you. Kalel Mullings might actually pile drive you into the earth. I mean, the ferocity with which he runs is so impressive. And yesterday, I mean, to say he made the most of his 5 touches is an understatement. His first run, you mentioned it, 20-yard touchdown run on 3rd and 1. After that, Reiner, he had 4 more touches on 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2, 3rd and 4, and 4th and 1. So 4 short yardage down and distance situations. He ran for 6 yards, 5 yards, 5 yards, and 6 yards, and converted all 4 first downs. So for me, the Michigan running game story of this day is if it is not Blake Corum in a crucial down and distance situation, Kalel Mullings has earned that short yardage role. 5 for 5 yesterday. Cannot do better than that.
Yeah, Mullings received the 2nd best grade by Pro Football Focus. Yep. Off the game. Again, he's a guy that has shown some versatility. Obviously played defense and has come back to the offensive side. He was versatile as a high school recruit, playing both sides. So, he's just one of those kind of utility players for Michigan and somebody that, Jim Harbaugh typically likes to have. And he's reliable in the sense that he will get you those yards, and he's shown some burst. He had the one mishap, obviously, in the college football playoff, but it's not something that obviously was part of a trend with Kalel Mullings. I mean, this is more indicative of what his kind of performance has been.
And that felt as much on the exchange as anything,
exactly,
right?
Exactly.
Which can be a product of just reps. I mean, he had repped at linebacker forever. You are not putting that ball in that same pocket. Like, how many times has JJ handed it to Blake?
Absolutely. He's a solid player. I mean, he's one of those guys that, good football teams have. I mean, he's dependable and kind of is just one of those guys that you can turn to in a pinch, and he's going to probably deliver.
It seems that way, and it seems as though Blake Corum is obviously the go-to back. I mean, he very quietly leads the nation with 9 rushing touchdowns. Roman Wilson, by the way, leads the country with 8 receiving touchdowns through 5 weeks. So, I mean, very, very, like, just some really good productivity coming from those high-end guys. But with Corum scoring this much on the ground, it means pretty much by definition others have not. And someone who still has not gotten into the end zone, still not rushed for 50 yards in a game, is Donovan Edwards. Yesterday, 14 carries, 48 yards. Early, Reiner, we felt like we saw some signs. He had a 9-yard run. I think he had another 8-yard run. Early on, Corum had 6 runs for 26. Dono had 6 for 24. I mean, you're really looking for signs, right? That it's coming. But it finished with 14 for 48. Didn't have a carry over 10 yards, and just kind of another one of those days for Donovan Edwards. And so I am to the point where, I mean, he's still athletic and talented and dynamic. He can hit home runs. I still believe that. I mean, that ability, he has not just lost it. And other defenses need to game plan around him. So I'm almost at the point where it is continuing to work and get him the ball, but he had 14 carries and a reception. So 15 touches for 51 yards. I'm pretty sure 15 touches spread around the rest of the Michigan offense can get much more than 51 yards, Reiner. I mean, think about it. 3 targets to Colston Loveland, 3 to Roman, and then 9 handoffs to Blake and Kalel and JJ on a read option. You're getting it's just, I don't know, Reiner. I'm scratching my head. I'm kind of out of options.
I agree. I think if this was a tighter game and Nebraska posed much more of a threat, you would not have seen as many touches to Donovan Edwards. I don't think that they would have been as, liberal in how they gave him carries and targets as much if this was a tight game, because they were trying. It seemed like they were trying to get some momentum for him and trying to get him to break out of this kind of slump. And he didn't really do that in this game. I mean, again, like as you referenced, I mean, it looked like he was going to get there in the early going, but as the game wore on, he didn't kind of have that breakout moment or anything like that. 14 touches for 14 carries for 48 yards. He had the worst yards per carry average of, the top three or, players that typically get carries for Michigan. So it just is not
of anyone on Michigan's team, even Tavier Dunlap. I mean, and obviously this is not apples to apples, but like 4 for 14 in mop-up time is 3.5, which is technically more. I mean, I'm not worried about 3.5 versus 3.4, but it's, I mean, Reiner, his final 7 runs of the day, which started in the second quarter. This is from the 9:15 mark of the second quarter to the 5:38 of the third quarter, right? So this is not, I mean, this is still the middle meat of the game. 0 yards, 2 yards, 2 yards, 1 yard, 4 yards, 4 yards, 2 yards.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, his run before that was 9. The run before that was 3. So one run out of his final 9 went for more than 4 yards. It's just that's sort of telling the story right now.
Yeah, it is strange. And I mean, obviously it's become a trend, so it is concerning for Michigan. Luckily for them, they've got depth and at that position, and they have depth at the receiver position too. So they could use him as a change up at times and maybe incorporate him in sparingly. They don't have to rely on him, and that's probably good at the moment. And unfortunate for him. I mean, it just hasn't really come together for him this year as he was expecting. I mean, had very lofty expectations, as we all know, going into the season, and it just hasn't materialized.
Yeah, and this might seem like a weird comparison, but what it makes me think of to last year is Roman Wilson, another guy who just is, I mean, obviously different position, electric with the ball in his hands, but just not consistent. I mean, so like at the end of last year, Roman Wilson against MSU, 1 catch, -3 yards, no catches the next week. Then 1 for 13 against Nebraska, 1 for 9 against Illinois, 1 for no yards against Ohio State. I mean, did Roman Wilson just learn how to play football in the last 12 months? You know what I mean? I mean, and now he leads the nation in touchdowns. So
the difference is that Roman will. I mean, this has been a gradual workup, and he's also dependent on targets. Here, they actually given the ball to Donovan Edwards, and he hasn't been doing much with it. And they've been giving him a lot of run, and it's not worked out, so far. But again,
I'm trying to spin zone it and a little bit, Reiner, and just say that Michigan's offense in recent years has seen very dynamic people who we thought would be more involved, more necessary. I mean, last year Michigan was clamoring for receivers to catch on, right? And this year, early on, Michigan was searching and still sort of is. We think the run game is fine, but is searching for the run game to get going. Like Michigan could have really used Roman Wilson's more production last year. Michigan can the same thing from Donovan.
But these are kind of first world problems, as we'll get into. Yeah, I mean, these are. And this is the mark of a good team, where you are quibbling about, whether the second running back, can really get going, and when you actually have another running back who is also giving you productive yards and productive carries and such. And so this is not something that's a huge major issue. I don't think right now. I mean, of course, they would love Donovan Edwards to play at the level that he did at the end of the 2022 season last year. But at the same time, it's not the biggest deal in the world, considering all the firepower they have elsewhere. I mean, you've got 2 high-quality tight ends with Loveland and Barner. You've got an elite receiver or a person that looks like he's becoming an elite receiver with Roman Wilson.
You can call Roman an elite receiver.
You got J.J. McCarthy. Again, a high level quarterback.
That Blake Corum guy's pretty good.
And then you got Blake Corum again, who was a Heisman contender before he got injured, and so. I mean, it's just it's an embarrassment of riches, and so, I mean, Donovan Edwards not being productive is not the biggest deal in the world, considering all the other weapons that Michigan has in its arsenal.
You're right, and it is because of all that depth that Michigan now has this mentality that Trevor Keegan was explaining to us post game of the difference the last few years, which is sort of our last final thought as we wrap up this first block. Michigan used to say we can win. Now Michigan says, "Oh, we will win," and evidence suggests as much. 30-3 now across the past 3 seasons. You couldn't be more confident than this group. But Jim Harbaugh is very careful to say it is confident, not cocky, and that is important to them.
Yeah, and there's he constantly refers to that there is zero entitlement. But again, the way that Michigan played on Saturday, where they were focused so much on the details and the execution, I mean, not committing a penalty is indicative of like the standard of what they're trying to accomplish, going forward. And it's a mark again of a good team where they're not going to settle for just being good. They're trying to be great and trying to be perfect. And Trevor Keegan talked about the fact that the big complacency was the biggest threat for Michigan going into the season, and he doesn't see much complacency with the players. There's a drive and there's a hunger still to get this thing done. And Harbaugh even talked about it. It's like, this is a team that got it done Saturday, and it's true. I mean, it looks like a professional team, a team that's handling its business and going about it, and isn't concerned about the team across the way, and they don't think they can just take it for granted. They're trying to reach their standard, and I thought it was a very encouraging sign after watching that game, just because they knew that they were probably going to win the game, but they still went out and played their style of football and executed at an extremely high level.
Yeah, which is why I wanted to ask that question to Jim, because we do this, right? We talk about it, we dissect it, we analyze it, we think about it, but really what matters is them, what they're doing, what they're thinking, how they're planning, how they're preparing. And as Michigan continues its onslaught, they're going to beat Minnesota probably again next week by 30, 40, whatever. Same with Indiana the week after. It's just, I wanted to ask Jim, like, what do you remember about these weeks, right? Like, what do you learn about these weeks? And it's just Michigan learn. It sounds cliche, but learning about itself. And you said the line that, like, we get it done. That's what Michigan learned again. We get it done. It's not, and maybe it's not learning, it's just proving it. And we're gonna talk about it on the other side of the break. Don't scoff. Nobody should scoff at proving it week in and week out, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And again, this is a program that's faced average teams before. I mean, this is prior to this recent resurgence of the program, where they did struggle. They had to fight off Indiana at times. They didn't put away Army in 2019. They're at a point where again they're just dominating these teams and beating them by 3 touchdowns or more. And even in a performance like against Bowling Green, where it was sloppy, and that was not anywhere close to what the standard is at Michigan these days, and yet they still won by 25. And it's indicative of a program that's kind of operating at a very high level week in and week out, and kind of has found its formula to win. So I think it's encouraging to see Michigan reach this level where they're not leaving any doubt about who's whether they're the best team on the field that day.
Well said. And we're going to leave it there, because on the other side of the break, we will expand on that, because as Michigan has done that and continues to do that, not everybody is. So where does Michigan fit in this greater landscape? And what are we thinking about college football through 5 weeks? All right, welcome back, Reiner. Michigan, we just talked about it in pretty lengthy detail. A 45-7 victory over Nebraska. One of the things I wrote about this morning was about the seemingly, and it happens every year, the moving goalposts, right? So Michigan did not overwhelm in the non-conference. Actually, technically, they did not even cover the Vegas spread in any of those 3 games. But those of us who were paid to watch it and watch all the snaps, whether we want to or not in the end, I mean, when you're playing second string, third string guys, true freshmen, walk-ons in the fourth quarter, just for reps, obviously the stats are not going to really be there. But now, when you are playing your start, well, I mean, I guess as it turns out, they did pull their starters midway through the third quarter this time, but just because they were dominating so much and they were still able to run it up, Michigan was. And so I just want to talk with you about the perception of these continually moving goalposts for Michigan. At first, it was do it like the non-con wasn't enough. It was do it against the Big Ten team. Then they hammer Rutgers, and it's like, oh, well, that's just Rutgers. Even if Rutgers is better at 4-1, that was just Rutgers at home. Then it became do it on the road. Michigan goes on the road, annihilates Nebraska. And I mean, Nebraska's not a good team, but as you are about to detail for us, good teams go and play not good teams on the road and struggle all the time. So don't take it for granted when you hammer someone.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's, it should be contextualized by the fact that, Georgia struggled against Auburn, barely squeaked that one out. That was also on the road.
Their first road game of the year.
Exactly. And USC had to sweat it out against Colorado at the end. I mean, the defense was a sieve again, and looked very shaky towards the end against Colorado as they weathered a comeback from them. LSU lost to Ole Miss, and basically their chances at the college football playoff are done. So again, I mean, Michigan winning by these a huge margin should not be just because it's Nebraska. Should not be just kind of sloughed off as some kind of small event. I mean, I think the fact that they did perform at such a high level, again, not committing a penalty, not committing turnover, being able to assert itself and impose its will with its running game, play its style of football at a very high level is indicative of a very strong team, and a team that is, again, gearing up for another run to the college football playoff and will put themselves in contention.
And what's so important is to be able to do it week in and week out, right? That consistency and ability to travel on the road. It's easy to get up when you're at home and you have your whole crowd and the night lights and everything. It's different on a sleepy afternoon at Jordan-Hare or whatever. And I mean, I probably wasn't very sleepy in Auburn with Georgia coming, but you know what I mean? And that can happen at Purdue, or it can happen at Northwestern with Penn State, right? They were just, I mean, they ended up hammering Northwestern, but they were down 10-3 late in the first half. I mean, they had to sort of wake up. And even Florida State, who I do have, like they're at 2 and 3 with Michigan in my rankings. And I have Florida State a little higher because they have some of the most impressive wins, neutral field against LSU, at Clemson, right? So those very impressive travel and do it wins. But they also survived Boston College by 2 points. And if Boston College, I was watching the end of that game, Boston College committed their program worst 18th penalty to give Florida State an automatic first down, move the chains, and ice the game. So even with that, like a bad Boston College team who's 2 and 3 pushed one of the most elite, talented teams in America. So, Reiner, where does Michigan fit?
I mean, I think they're a top 5 level team. I mean, I don't know where do they fall in the ranking. It's so hard to assess because college football is such a regional sport where you're basically trying to.
Not for long. It's not.
Well, right, exactly, with the way that it's changing. But I mean, again, it's hard to assess because these teams do not play uniform schedules. It's not the NFL and such, and so every year, I mean, you don't know what conference is real and what isn't. I mean, is the Pac-12 really as strong as it looks? I mean, who knows? In years past, it wasn't, and so. And the SEC was the strong conference. They look weak this year, but are they really that weak? Or are they just I guess maybe kind of working through some things. I mean, Alabama, again, we look at Alabama. Everybody was looking at that South Florida game as indicative of a program that's really fallen off. They've since come back and won 2 games, and rather impressively. I mean, they beat Ole Miss, and Ole Miss beat LSU, and then they took care of business against Mississippi State, and why I'm referencing that is that, yeah, they look bad at for a couple weeks there against Texas and South Florida. Michigan really hasn't. I mean, even when they looked maybe less than stellar at times, they've still won by a significant margin. They were never threatened, and they've raised the standard of play where, again, you're quibbling with the minor details, and you want your program to be like that. You want it to be at that level where you're nitpicking. I mean, I alluded to that. That's what Nebraska was like in the 90s. I mean, they were at that standard where the fans demanded excellence and they got it. And the fans for Michigan are like that now, where they're kind of pointing out they're not winning by 3 touchdowns. They should win by 4. And Jim Harbaugh saying like we only want to win by 1 point. When in reality, Michigan does want to dominate, and they do want to impose their will, and they should. I mean, that's a program that has reached a point where they can do that. And again, but at the same time, it's college football. These guys are 18 to 22-year-olds. They're not necessarily going to be able to create that consistent level of performance week in and week out. And so it shouldn't be taken for granted what Michigan did against Nebraska, where they dominated from start to finish.
Yeah, even when it looks like it's something you should do, because we not happen all the time. And I mean, it just gets me thinking about down the road and like looking at Michigan's schedule and that end to it, right? I mean, I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but at Penn State, at Maryland, home Ohio State. I mean, I just put Maryland for what it's worth. I, for the first time, just slid them at number 25 at the bottom of my AP poll. 5-0. Mike Loxley's team has looked quite good most of the time. They just steamrolled Indiana, and so I mean, just it's Michigan's going to be able to prove a lot late in the season. And again, I don't know how many times we can say it. As frustrated as we and the fans and many people may be about the schedule, the players do not create it, and just go win.
Yeah, and again, Michigan is playing at a point where they've got a standard that they want to reach, and they're being assessed against their own standard. They're not playing necessarily assessing themselves against the other team. Certainly, they weren't against Nebraska. They're trying to kind of compete against their own standard, and so
you're like an inch away from their main line. The standard is the standard. That's what right. I mean, we've heard them say it time. You're exactly right. They only measure themselves. They are at that point. They only measure themselves against themselves.
Yeah, and it's a good mindset. I mean, that's what, again, when I covered Alabama for the first 3 years, that's how they played. I mean, they weren't playing to the other team's standard. They were playing to their own. They had high expectations. They wanted to execute at a near perfect level. Even J.J. McCarthy alluded to after the game that they're going to go back at the film and they'll probably find something that they weren't satisfied with, and they'll try to correct it. And that's again, what the best teams do. And so, I mean, I think it's good that Michigan is being held to that standard and that they are interested in achieving it. And if the fans also believe that they should get there, then, that's also good too. Because again, the program has arrived at that point. And so, but it shouldn't be taken for granted again that Michigan, the way that they played and I mean, despite the opponent and Nebraska being a weak team, the fact that they performed at such a high level.
I'm with you. Is there anyone else from around college football that you want to touch on? This was, I mean, for me, just, I mean, as we look at this bigger picture, doing this poll was, I mean, I don't know if frustrating is quite the right word, but I mean, Ohio State was on a bye. You had Washington State, Miami, North Carolina, all not playing. Then Duke. I didn't know what to do with Duke. I still fully believe in Duke. I mean Duke, Notre Dame, like transitive property, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Duke, right? Like, not transitive property is not how football works, but I mean they are right there. And they were leading Notre Dame.
True, but Riley Leonard got hurt, and that'll change things. Yeah, that'll change things significantly.
Depends on the severity. I mean, we know how serious.
I don't know. It looked bad, but we don't know. I mean, for sure. But if he is hurt, I mean, obviously all bets are off. It'd be the same thing if JJ McCarthy got hurt. I mean, a high level quarterback is everything in college football, or really at any level of the sport. So. It'll be interesting to see how they progress and whether they can still stay in contention in the ACC. I mean, again, the Pac-12 looks like it's going to be a dogfight, but Oregon looks like the clear best team in that conference. Yeah.
Yep. I do see it slowly starting to separate the Pac-12. Oregon at the top. I think Utah right below, Washington State and Oregon State, I would also put at that same level with USC. I think, USC I now have at 10 in my rankings after not impressing again against Colorado. And they can, look, I mean, Caleb Williams is fantastic. He's amazing. He is on the track. I mean, they need to win enough for him to push to be the first person since Archie Griffin for that second straight Heisman, right? But he's talented enough to do it, and is having the start to the season where he's in consideration, as we knew he would be. There's not enough on defense. There's just not. They miss tackles. There's no discipline. I mean, it is not an elite defensive team, and that cannot sustain when you're talking about the schedule, like you said. I mean, not only do they have to play the Pac-12, they have a game against Notre Dame at Notre Dame. Right. And so, I mean, they got to play Oregon, they got to play Utah, they got to play Notre Dame, they got to play Washington. They could lose all four of those games.
Absolutely. And I think Oregon and Washington are probably the class of.
Oh, I forgot Washington.
Of the Pac-12. But I would give Oregon just a slight edge just because I side with the fact that their defense is very strong and they're led by a defensive coach. And so out there, I think, that kind of gives them a little bit of an edge, just like, Utah is able to kind of remain at the top despite the talent differential, in part because they're so strong defensively. And so, But the
reason it's Oregon, sorry, Reiner. But the reason it's Oregon is because they have more offense than Utah. I know Cam Rising.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, no doubt. I mean, their offense is still strong. Maybe not as strong as Washington's, but their defense is probably the class of the Pac-12. And then, the Big 12, I mean, it's going to be interesting. Obviously, Texas and OU play this week. That should be, I think OU's become, again, embraced Venables' identity. They're becoming much stronger from a defensive standpoint than they were under Lincoln Riley. And the kind of identity of the program has shifted, much more balanced. They still have Dylan Gabriel at quarterback. So I'll be curious to see how that shakes out. And I mean, I don't know what the SEC is going to look like. I mean, Georgia does not look as strong as they did, and they'll play Kentucky. I think that matchup is actually coming up too, and so and Kentucky looks pretty formidable themselves, and so I think that could actually pose a lot of problems for Georgia. And out west, I mean, who knows what's going to happen with the SEC West? I mean, Alabama may end up coming out of it, on top, which would be kind of funny because a lot of people had written them off after the Texas loss and then the really poor performance against South Florida. So, the college football seems very wide open. It seems like a year where Michigan can really, has a real shot at the national title if they can continue to kind of build the momentum that they have.
Yeah, Georgia plays Kentucky this week, so we will get that answer soon. Oklahoma is at Texas. I like your call.
It's Red River. I mean, it's the Red River, so it's in Dallas. So it's
right. Right.
Yeah.
I forgot. Is that how long has that only been a neutral site game? That's terrible.
That's always been. It's as far as I know, it's always been
forever, always.
Yeah,
Texas and Oklahoma has never been at home.
I'm pretty sure it's always been at the Cotton Bowl. So, they haven't even moved it to the Jerry. Well, no, I mean it's not because it's 3 hours, and they have huge alumni bases in Dallas. So 3.5 hours from
don't bring your logic into this, right? This is passion, and who wouldn't you want your main rival on your campus?
Well, I mean,
imagine if Michigan and Ohio State played in Toledo every year.
Alabama and Auburn
that's not the same.
Alabama and Auburn played in Birmingham. That's why it was called the Iron Bowl. And so,
but now
they didn't move it to campus until I think '89 was the first year that they did that after, and then they finally full time moved it to each individual campus. But I mean, you've had Florida, Georgia. That's played in Jacksonville.
I'm not opposed to to moving it off campus at times, but I know you're right. I know that this game is frequently.
I agree.
I never realized that it was always neutral site. That's I don't like that.
Yeah, I'm not a huge neutral site fan either, but again, a lot of these rivalry games have been set up that way. Going back years and years and decades, and so it just is what it is. I mean, it's part of the college football tradition. I mean, it's like, again, that's what makes the sport different than the NFL. I mean, you don't have home and homes, with your divisional opponent, so to speak. It's sometimes it's at a neutral site.
Yeah. Well, as always, it'll be fun, and we're going to keep getting this clarity week by week, one by one. We will be back on when we will record Wednesday for Thursday, preview how Michigan will beat Minnesota, and then again on Sunday we'll talk about how they did that. And then I think it's good to, now that we're this far along, Ryder, to keep it. We've got to keep it in context of everything else, and so. I think this is sort of the best way to continue to do that. So I'm going to let you go, and I'm going to let everyone go because this is the end of the show now. As I say, thank you to so many people who make it possible. Editor-in-Chief Nicole Avery-Nichols, Executive Editor Anjanette Delgado, Sports Editor Kirkland Crawford, Audio Engineer Robin Chan, our sports editor and our show's producer, Andrew Burkle, and for everybody who is listening along and the kind people of Nebraska and at this Marriott Courtyard La Vista who let us have an extended stay so we could record this. So thank you, one and all. We'll talk to you soon. This is Hail Yes.